The rain came down not with the gentle grace of a summer shower, but with the spiteful, biting chill of an autumn tempest. It hammered against the slate roof of the Vandermeer mansion and slicked the marble statues in the garden until they wept stone tears. And in that garden, huddled beneath the inadequate shelter of a weeping willow whose branches offered more sorrow than protection, a woman sat on an overturned bucket, eating. Her name was Alara. She was the new maid, a phantom figure who moved through the opulent halls with a quiet efficiency that made her nearly invisible. That was how she preferred it. Invisibility was a shield. The meal was simple, packed that morning in a small, reusable container. A bed of quinoa, some roasted vegetables, a piece of grilled chicken. It had been warm once. Now, rainwater dripped from her hair onto the lid, mingling with the condensation, turning a humble but dignified lunch into a cold, watery mess. She ate it anyway. Each bite was a slow, deliberate act of defiance, though there was no one but the weeping statues to see it. From a second-story window, shielded from the storm by panes of leaded glass thick as his wallet, Alistair Finch watched. He was a millionaire, yes, but of a different vintage than his hostess. His wealth was new, built on tech and innovation, not inherited and polished over generations of disdain. He had arrived early for the annual Vandermeer Charity Gala, summoned for a pre-event meeting with the board, of which he was the reluctant, newly instated chairman. He had been admiring the ferocious beauty of the storm when he saw her. A black woman, dressed in the simple gray uniform of the household staff, eating in the deluge. It was a jarring image against the backdrop of manicured lawns and heated pools. It was wrong. He didn't know the why, but the what was enough. It was a portrait of profound injustice. An hour earlier, the air inside the mansion had been thick with the cloying scent of hothouse lilies and simmering panic. Beatrice Vandermeer, matriarch and self-appointed queen of society, was a storm system all her own. She swept through her home like a hurricane of Chanel and criticism, her voice a shrill wind that left staff members trembling in her wake. "No, no, no," she had shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at a floral arrangement. "The peonies are drooping. They look pathetic, like they've given up on life. Get them out of my sight." Alara had been polishing the silver in the butler's pantry, the rhythmic work a small island of peace in the chaotic ocean of the day. It was her designated lunch break. She had slipped into the cavernous, stainless steel kitchen, a space currently abandoned by the caterers as they set up their main stations in the event marquee outside. She sat on a small stool in a quiet corner, opened her container, and prepared to take her first bite. That was when Hurricane Beatrice made landfall. "What is this?" The voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. Alara stood up immediately. "Mr. Vandermeer, is my lunch break?" Beatrice's eyes, small and hard like polished stones, narrowed on the container in Alara's hands. "Your lunch break? In my kitchen? Using my air?" Her lip curled in a sneer of theatrical disgust. "And what is that smell?" Alara looked down at her food. It smelled of rosemary and thyme. It smelled like home. "It's my lunch, ma'am." "I will not have the help stinking up my house with their ethnic foods," Beatrice hissed, though the meal was as generically wholesome as could be. The accusation was not about the food. It was about the person holding it. "You are paid to be invisible. You are certainly not paid to squat in my kitchen and consume your peasant meals on my time." "It is my designated break," Alara repeated, her voice low and even, a stark contrast to Beatrice's rising hysteria. This calm, this infuriating lack of cowering, seemed to enrage Beatrice more than anything. With a sudden, vicious movement, she snatched the container from Alara's hands. She strode to the waste bin, the one with the motion-activated lid that opened like a silent, hungry mouth. She scraped the entire meal into the bin. Quinoa, chicken, lovingly roasted vegetables. All of it. "There," she said, thrusting the empty container back at Alara. "Your break is over, and from now on, you will take your meals outside. I don't care if it's hailing fire and brimstone. You're not to eat under my roof. Is that clear?" Alara looked from Beatrice's triumphant, cruel face to the bin. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, but her expression remained a mask of placid neutrality. She had endured worse. This was just another stone on an already heavy pile. "Yes, ma'am," she said. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, took her empty container, and walked out. But she did not go back to polishing silver. She walked to the staff exit, retrieved the bin liner before it was taken to the incinerator, and carefully picked her soiled, but still salvageable, meal from the refuse. She found a bucket in the potting shed, carried it to the far side of the garden, and sat down as the first drops of rain began to fall. This was the scene Alistair Finch witnessed. He felt a surge of cold fury. He had seen cruelty in boardrooms, in ruthless negotiations that dismantled companies and lives. But this was different. This was personal. It was petty. It was the casual evil of a person who believed others were less than human. His knuckles were white where he gripped the window frame. He was about to storm downstairs and confront Beatrice, Gala be damned, when a new crisis erupted. A wail, even more piercing than Beatrice's usual tirades, echoed up the grand staircase. It was Beatrice's personal assistant. "He's sick. Chef Antoine is sick. Food poisoning. He can't cook. The caterers, they can't do the signature menu without him." The news spread like a virus. The gala, Beatrice van der Meer's crowning social achievement of the year, was headless. The celebrity chef, the one she had bragged about for months, was out of commission. For Beatrice, this was not a catering issue. It was an extinction-level event. Her rivals would gloat. The society columns would be merciless. She would be a laughingstock. Alistair watched from the landing as Beatrice paced the marble foyer, her face a mask of apoplectic horror. "Get another chef. I don't care who. Give me anyone." Her assistant, pale and trembling, stammered. "At this short notice? For 300 people? It's impossible. No one can replicate Chef Antoine's menu." It was then that Alara walked back inside, soaked to the bone, her empty food container held loosely in one hand. She had finished her meal. She walked past the frantic scene in the foyer, intending to go to the staff changing room. But she heard the word impossible, and that word had a certain resonance for her. She paused. She looked at Beatrice's crumbling facade, at the chaos, at the utter panic, and she made a decision. She turned and walked toward the group. "Meesteres van der Meer." Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the noise. Beatrice whirled around, her eyes blazing. "What do you want now? Have you come to gloat?" "I can cook the dinner," Alara said simply. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Beatrice let out a laugh. It was not a sound of humor. It was a sharp, ugly bark of disbelief and contempt. "You," she screeched, looking Alara up and down, taking in the drenched uniform, the quiet poverty of her presence. "You are a maid. A maid. You clean my toilets. And you think you can cook for my gala? For 300 of the most influential people in this city." The other staff members, who had gathered at the edges of the drama, looked on with a mixture of fear and pity. Alistair Finch descended the last few steps of the staircase, his presence silent but heavy. "I can cook," Alara repeated. Her gaze did not waver. It was unervingly steady. This utter lack of intimidation was the final spark on Beatrice's frayed nerves. She wanted to crush this woman, to humiliate her for her insolence, for her infuriating dignity. "Fine," Beatrice sneered, a venomous idea forming in her mind. This was a chance to utterly destroy the maid. "Fine, you want to play chef? Let's make this interesting." She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "You will cook for my guests. If, by some miracle, they're not utterly disgusted by your slop, if they're even remotely satisfied, I will give you $1,000. She paused for effect, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "But when they spit it out, when my gala is ruined by your incompetence, you will not just be fired. I will personally ensure your name is blacklisted. You will never work in this city again. Not as a cook, not as a maid, not even as a street sweeper. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. Do you understand?" It was a threat of total annihilation, delivered with relish. The room was silent. The weight of the wager hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Alara looked at Beatrice, her dark eyes reflecting the cold light of the chandeliers. Then she spoke. "I accept." A gasp went through the small audience. However, Ilara continued, her voice gaining a new, hard edge of authority. I have my own conditions. Beatrice's jaw tightened. Conditions? Yes. Your $1,000 is an insult. We will not wager with money. We will wager with dignity. Ilara's eyes were locked on Beatrice's. When my meal is a success, not if, when you will stand before all of your guests and you will deliver a full, public apology to me. You will apologize for your behavior this afternoon and for your prejudice. The audacity of the demand was breathtaking. Furthermore, Ilara said, her voice ringing with a power no one had ever heard from her before, you will establish a culinary scholarship fund. A fund for underprivileged youth in this city who dream of becoming chefs but lack the means. You will fund it, in full, for 5 years. Beatrice was speechless, her face a mottled canvas of fury and shock. This was not the response of a terrified maid. This was a counterattack, blinded by her own arrogance. Convinced of Ilara's inevitable and humiliating failure, Beatrice saw only a chance to make the fall even greater. Done, she snapped. I agree to your ridiculous terms. Now go. Go and seal your fate. I will witness this agreement. The new voice was deep, calm, and carried the effortless authority of command. Alastair Finch stepped into the center of the foyer. All eyes turned to him. His presence changed the dynamic of the room instantly. He looked not at Beatrice, but at Ilara, with an expression of profound respect. Then his gaze shifted to Beatrice, and it was as cold as a banker's heart. I am a witness to this contract, he stated clearly, and I will personally ensure its terms are honored. By both parties. Beatrice paled slightly. Alastair Finch was not a man to be trifled with, but her pride, her absolute certainty, overrode her caution. She just nodded curtly. Ilara gave Alastair a small, grateful nod. Then, without another word, she turned and walked towards the kitchen. As she pushed open the swinging doors, the chaos of her present reality faded, replaced by the ghosts of her past. The clatter and steam were not from the Vandermeer mansion, but from another kitchen, another life. The Gilded Spoon, her restaurant, her dream, forged in steel and fire and passion. She saw the faces of her old team, a loyal brigade that moved with the fluid precision of a ballet. She heard the roar of the ovens, the sizzle of the pans, the symphony she had conducted every night. She remembered the day the first Michelin inspector came, disguised as a simple tourist. She had poured her soul onto his plate. She remembered the phone call, the breathless joy of earning her first star. And then the second, Chef et la Ravance. Her name had been whispered with reverence in the culinary world. Her reservations were booked a year in advance. Her food was not just sustenance. It was art, it was storytelling, it was magic. Then came the fire, a flash of orange, the smell of accelerant, the shattering of glass. She remembered standing across the street, wrapped in a coarse fire blanket, watching her life burn to the ground. The investigation had revealed arson. A jealous rival, a man whose own restaurant had withered in the shadow of the Gilded Spoon, was the prime suspect. But he had vanished, leaving a trail of debt and unanswered questions. And he had left her with nothing. The insurance was a complex, fraudulent policy sold by a broker who also disappeared, leaving her financially naked. The debt was crushing. Her mother's medical bills were piling up. The world that had celebrated her now pitted her. The offers of help felt like charity, like she was a project. Her pride couldn't bear it. So she vanished too. She became Ilara, the maid. She took on menial work, paying her debts one humiliating day at a time, saving every spare dollar. She was biding her time, gathering her strength, waiting for the moment to rise from the ashes. She had not realized that moment would be tonight. Ilara pushed the memories aside as she stepped fully into the kitchen. The catering staff were in disarray, a ship without a rudder. What do we do? We can't serve this menu. We don't have the prep for Antoine's signature dishes, one of them cried. Ilara surveyed the scene. Her posture changed. The quiet, unassuming maid was gone. In her place stood a 5-star general taking command of a battlefield. Forget Antoine's menu, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it resonated with absolute authority. Every head snapped towards her. "You," she said, pointing to a young, terrified-looking sous chef. "What's your name?" "Leo," he stammered. "Lao, give me a full inventory. Proteins, vegetables, starches, spices. Everything. Now." She pointed to another. "You, get every clean pan we have on the ranges. Medium heat. Now." And to another. "You, start prepping mirepoix. Fine dice. I want precision. Go." The staff, accustomed to taking orders, were galvanized by her confidence. The panic in the room began to recede, replaced by a focused, nervous energy. Leo returned, rattling off the inventory. Alara listened, her eyes closed for a moment, a Rolodex of flavors and textures spinning in her mind. She was creating a new menu from scratch, in real time, based on ingredients intended for another chef's vision. It was an act of pure, unadulterated genius. "All right," she announced, her eyes snapping open. "New menu. Listen closely." She laid it out. A 5-course tasting menu that was daring, innovative, and completely unexpected. A chilled cucumber and avocado soup with crab and a hint of lime to start. Seared scallops on a saffron risotto cake with a brown butter vinaigrette. A deconstructed beef Wellington with a mushroom duxelle transformed into a savory puree and the pastry becoming a delicate, flaky crisp. The main course, a pan-roasted duck breast with a cherry and port reduction. Serve alongside a parsnip and potato gratin. For dessert, a lavender-infused panna cotta with a honey poached pear and toasted almonds. The catering staff stared at her, their mouths agape. The menu was more ambitious, more elegant, more brilliant than the one they were supposed to be cooking. "Can you do it?" Alara asked, her eyes scanning their faces. Leo, the young sous chef, looked at her with something akin to worship. "Chef," he said, the title coming naturally to his lips. "With you leading, we can do anything." A fire lit in Alara's soul. "Then let's cook," she commanded. And so began the symphony. Alara moved through the kitchen like a dancer. She didn't shout. She guided. Her instructions were clear, concise, and calm. She showed a line cook the precise way to score the duck skin for a perfect render. She tasted a sauce with a disposable spoon, her brow furrowed in concentration, before adding a micro pinch of salt that somehow transformed it from good to divine. Alistair Finch had found a vantage point, a small service window that looked into the kitchen. He was a known gourmand, a man who flew to Tokyo for sushi and to Paris for pastry. He knew food, and he knew he was watching a master at work. He recognized the techniques, the effortless way she emulsified a sauce, the surgical precision of her knife work, the calm command she held over the chaos. It was familiar. He racked his brain. Where had he seen this style, this grace under pressure? Then it hit him. The gilded spoon. He had eaten there once, years ago. It had been the single greatest meal of his life. He remembered the chef, a powerful black woman whose passion was evident in every bite. Chef et la Havance. He looked back through the window at the maid in the drenched gray uniform. It couldn't be, could it? Upstairs in the grand ballroom, the guests were growing restless. The delay was becoming noticeable. Beatrice was sweating, her makeup threatening to run. Every whisper felt like an indictment. Then, the first course emerged from the kitchen. Waiters moved in silent, synchronized choreography, placing small, elegant bowls before each guest. It was the chilled cucumber soup, a vibrant, perfect green with a delicate mound of white crab meat in the center, dotted with chili oil. A hush fell over the room as people took their first spoonful. The silence was then broken by a collective murmur of pure, unadulterated pleasure. "My goodness," a portly banker muttered. "What is this?" "It's transcendent," his wife replied, her eyes wide. Beatrice watched, confused. This wasn't the reaction she expected. She flagged down a waiter and took a bowl for herself. She tasted it. The flavor was explosive, cool, creamy, with the sweetness of the crab, the gentle heat of the chili, the bright tang of lime. It was complex, balanced, and utterly perfect. It was, without a doubt, the best soup she had ever tasted in her life. A cold dread, far colder than the soup, began to creep up her spine. Course after course came out, each one a greater triumph than the last. The scallops were seared to a perfect, caramelized crust, yet tender and almost translucent inside. The deconstructed Wellington was a playful, brilliant twist on a classic. With each plate that was cleared, scraped clean by diners who wouldn't leave a single drop of sauce behind, Beatrice's panic grew. The murmurs of pleasure turned into open declarations of awe. "This is better than Antoine," someone declared loudly. "Antoine is a hack compared to this," another laughed. "Beatrice, where have you been hiding this genius?" Beatrice could only manage a weak, frozen smile. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but she was trapped in the center of her own party, a party that was rapidly becoming a celebration of her impending doom. She saw Alastair Finch standing near the stage, watching her. There was no triumph in his expression, just a calm, clinical observation, like a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction. That look terrified her more than anything. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared to another round of spontaneous applause, the guests began to chant, "Chef! Chef! Chef!" They wanted to meet the artist. Beatrice felt the floor drop out from under her. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Alastair Finch calmly walked onto the small stage, taking the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice silencing the room, "I'm glad you enjoyed your meal." He smiled. "Tonight, you have had the rare privilege of dining on the creations of a true master. A culinary artist who was tragically lost to us, but who, it seems, has returned." The crowd buzzed with anticipation. "Many of you have asked who this culinary genius is," Alastair continued, his eyes finding Beatrice in the crowd. "Allow me to reintroduce you to a chef whose restaurant once held 2 Michelin stars. Please welcome, from the legendary Gilded Spoon, Chef Hilaire." He gestured to the side of the stage. The kitchen doors opened, and Hilaire walked out. She had removed her soaked maid's uniform. She was wearing a crisp, white chef's jacket, hastily borrowed from the catering manager. It was a little too big, but she wore it like royal armor. A wave of shock and recognition swept through the room. Many of the guests were gourmands and investors who had known her name, had eaten her food, had mourned the loss of her restaurant. Hilaire Vance. "I thought she disappeared. My God, it is her." The ballroom erupted in a thunderous, standing ovation. It was a roar of welcome, of respect, of sheer adoration. Hilaire stood there, her calm composure finally cracking as a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of release. Beatrice stared, her mind unable to process the information. The maid. Her maid. Was Chef Hilaire Vance, the most celebrated chef of the last decade. It was impossible, a nightmare, but the nightmare was just beginning. However, Alastair said, his voice turning grave as he held up a hand to quiet the applause, "I feel you should all know the extraordinary circumstances under which Chef Vance cooked for you tonight." Behind him, the large screens that were meant to be displaying the charity's logo flickered to life. The image was grainy, black and white. It was security footage. It showed the kitchen. It showed Beatrice, her face contorted in a mask of rage. It showed her snatching the food container. It showed her scraping the meal into the trash. Then, the feed switched to an outdoor camera. It showed Hilaire, sitting on a bucket in the pouring rain, salvaging her lunch. A collective gasp of horror went through the ballroom. The guests stared at the screen, then at Beatrice, their faces a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Beatrice felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on her, each one a hot poker of judgment. "Mrs. Vandermeer made a wager with Chef Vance earlier today," Alastair announced, his voice booming through the silent room. "A wager I had the privilege to witness." He detailed the cruel terms Beatrice had laid out, the blacklisting, the utter ruin. Then he detailed Hilaire's terms. "And so, Mrs. Vandermeer," Alastair said, turning his full attention to her, "the meal was, by all accounts, a spectacular success, which means you have a debt to pay. You owe Chef Vance a public apology, and you owe this city's youth a 5-year scholarship." Beatrice's face had gone from red to a ghastly, bloodless white. "And one more thing," Alastair added, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. As the chairman of the board for this very charity, I find your conduct, as displayed on that screen, to be utterly reprehensible. It speaks to a character unfit to manage a foundation built on the premise of helping others. Effective immediately, you are suspended from your position as director, pending a full investigation into the foundation's finances and your treatment of all staff, past and present. That was the final blow. No, Beatrice whimpered, the sound barely audible. Then, her composure shattered completely. No, you can't. I am Beatrice Vandermeer. This is my house. My gala. You can't do this to me. Her shrill, pathetic protests were met with a wall of cold, silent contempt. Her power, built on a foundation of fear and social standing, had evaporated in an instant. 2 uniformed security guards, hired for the event, moved toward her. They were joined by 2 stern-faced individuals Alistair recognized from the charity's board. Beatrice, one of them said, his voice void of all its earlier warmth. I think it's time for you to go. They escorted her out of her own ballroom, past the guests who turned their backs on her, past the staff who watched with stony, liberated faces. As she was led away, a disgraced queen deposed in her own court, her eyes met Alara's one last time. In Alara's gaze, there was no hatred, no triumph. There was only a profound, quiet pity. Alara then stepped forward and took the microphone from Alistair. The room was hers. Thank you all, she began, her voice steady and clear. Tonight was not about revenge. It was not even about food. It was about dignity, she said, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the wealthy and powerful. A person's worth is not determined by their job title, or the price of their clothes, or the size of the roof over their head. It is measured in their character, in their kindness, in the respect they show to every single person, whether they are a CEO or the person who cleans their floors. Tonight, I was forced to eat in the rain, she continued, but I was not diminished. Humiliation is not something that can be imposed upon you. It is something you accept. I never accepted it. My dignity was my own, and it could not be taken. True poverty, she concluded, is not a lack of money. It is a lack of empathy. She finished speaking. For a moment, there was a profound silence. Then, the applause began again. It was deeper this time, more thoughtful. It was an acknowledgement not just of her skill, but of her soul. 6 months later, the name Beatrice Vandermeer was now a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. The investigation had uncovered years of financial misconduct, of charity funds being diverted to fuel her lavish lifestyle. Her husband, a man who valued his reputation above all else, divorced her in a swift and brutal legal proceeding, leaving her with a pittance. Her children, embarrassed and ashamed, stopped returning her calls. Shunned by the society she had fought so desperately to rule, she was forced to sell the mansion and its contents to cover her legal fees and restitution. The last anyone saw of her, she was working as a cleaner in a downtown office building, wiping down tables in a food court, her face perpetually etched with a bitterness that had curdled her very soul. She now wore the invisibility of the service class, not as a choice, but as a life sentence. On the other side of the city, a new light was shining. Phoenix, the sign read in elegant, glowing script. It was Alara's new restaurant, funded by a consortium of investors led by a very enthusiastic Alistair Finch. It was more than just a restaurant. It was a statement. The main dining room was an instant sensation, booked solid for the next 2 years, as critics and food lovers flocked to witness the resurrection of a culinary legend. But the heart of the building was the teaching kitchen in the back. It was the home of the Vance Scholarship, ironically and justly funded by the sale of Beatrice Vandermeer's liquidated assets. Here, Alara, now universally known as Chef Vance, spent her days mentoring a dozen aspiring young chefs, kids from the toughest neighborhoods, kids who had the passion but not the pedigree. She taught them how to make a perfect sauce, yes, but she also taught them about integrity, about resilience, about self-worth. She taught them that the most important ingredient in any dish was their own dignity. Her actions had sent ripples through the city's service industry. Staff, inspired by her stand, began to demand better treatment, better pay. The story of the maid who toppled a queen became a quiet revolution. One evening, Alistair sat at the chef's table in Phoenix, watching Alara guide one of her students. She was showing him how to plate a dish, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision and an artist's grace. She was not just creating food. She was building futures. The story of Alara Vance and Beatrice Vandermeer became a modern fable. It served as a powerful, enduring reminder. It proved that true wealth is not something you can hoard in a bank or display in a ballroom. It is the richness of your character, the compassion in your heart. And it showed, with absolute clarity, that arrogance built on a foundation of prejudice is the most fragile structure of all. It can be brought down by a single, quiet soul who refuses to be broken, a soul who knows their own worth, even when they are forced to eat in the rain.